Welcome back to We Married the Family, the place for all your in-law issues, questions, and explorations as a daughter-in-law and as a couple. There's something I've been feeling recently, and in fact it's actually delayed this episode because it was showing up in my work and conversations, and even I got a bit paralyzed within it. But I've really been feeling the hopelessness and helplessness for women who are in situations that they're unhappy with. For many daughters-in-law, there's a real sense of stuckness, like nothing is going to change, and that you'll just have to deal with this same struggle for the rest of your days. It's really tough to be in that space, when you're feeling pain, powerlessness, and a lack of motivation for such a prolonged period of time that you become conditioned to it and don't have the will or the way to get out. In today's episode, I'll share some of the psychology behind this state and the things that are needed to move through it. I know there'll be so many women who can relate to these feelings and the question in the title of this episode. You don't need to figure out how to solve anything or how to fix the problem, but you just need to turn towards the next step on your path. Because as Maya Angelou said, nothing will work unless you do. For daughters-in-law, there are countless rules that you're told to follow, or rules that you pick up and you try and adapt to. And a lot of these rules are unfair towards women. They tell you how you should live, how you should speak, what you can and can't do. A lot of these rules are very controlling towards women, and sometimes you might internalize the control that culture keeps on women to the point that you feel you have zero control in your own life, which leaves you feeling helpless and hopeless. You've got your in-laws' expectations that you have to think about us now before you think about yourself, and possibly your husband's expectations that you just have to keep my parents happy, or that the wife is the one that should compromise. Maybe your own parents are saying things to you like, just don't upset anyone, or this is how it is for women when they get married. And the people that you're now living with are also telling you how to cook, how to clean, what you should do, what you can do, where you can go and not go, and who you can go with. You've got other people making decisions for you, and then you're left feeling that you haven't got any control even over the smallest parts of your day-to-day life. And when you do try and take control and you make a decision, you give a suggestion or you ask for something, maybe you decide to do something or say something, and it's met with negativity and either you're dismissed or now receiving passive-aggressive comments. People will say to you that, why are you being so stubborn, or why can't you compromise more, that you should be grateful and that you're just making life difficult for everyone in the house. This is where something called learned helplessness can start to develop. This is a state where a person believes that nothing they do is going to make a difference. And it affects your self-esteem. It makes you emotionally withdrawn, and it can even spiral into things like anxiety and depression. Imagine a woman sat in a room with the curtains and windows open. She's enjoying the view and the sounds of nature. But someone keeps coming into the room and telling her that she needs to keep the windows and curtains closed. So the woman, after hearing this countless times, closes the curtains and turns the light on. But now the person is coming in the room telling her that she needs to keep the light off. And now she's sat in this dark room. She might get up and try and leave and go towards the door, but then she's pushed back in each time. So she just stays where she is. And every so often she sees the outside light flicker through, but with no way of reaching it, and now she's feeling trapped in the darkness. And the longer she sits in the dark, the worse she feels, becoming more and more disconnected from her own self and her own power. These are some of the reasons that you might remain in the dark room, because you've become helpless or depressed. You've lost your energy to make decisions. You've lost your energy to challenge the system. You've lost your energy to ask for what you need. And your energy becomes dampened because everything that made you feel alive and energized has now been depressed. Others have been making choices for you and making it difficult for you to live your life. And they've told you to stop asking for your own space, or this is what you agreed to, that my parents don't have anyone else and that you need to stop complaining. And because of the constant dead ends, you lose hope in things changing. This woman isn't able to see a way out. She's not receiving support, and she just doesn't have the energy to travel the distance between what she's feeling and the door to get out. The sad thing is, if you continue to sit in the dark room, then your life is likely to stay the same, and you're likely to just feel worse over time. When a daughter-in-law becomes helpless, she might just wait for life to give her something different. for her husband to make a different decision, or for her in-laws to move, or even pass away. You might be waiting for that thing or that person who is overpowering you to disappear. Then you feel you can live your life. But you can't keep waiting for others to move out of your way before you make your move. And I say that with complete recognition of male privilege, of the patriarchal culture, and the systemic forces that are at play. I know you're up against all of these things, and other people 100% have a responsibility for their part in this. But if you still have some bits of energy, like a flicker of hope or a moment of anger, then try and use that to make a change before your energy gets completely extinguished. Otherwise, you could be waiting in this dark room for decades. Some daughters-in-law will keep pursuing things for themselves and keep pushing for change, and they do encounter really tough periods of struggle, but then something eventually changes. Others end up separating from their partner because the system isn't able to adapt to any other way except for keeping her closed in the dark, and that's not something that she is going to tolerate. But this cycle of women being in unhappy and miserable marriages is not going to be over until women are resourced enough and supported enough to do something different. And that includes both internal support and resourcing and external. If a woman in a previous generation lived like this, she's also going to encourage her daughters to accept situations that lead to helplessness, more often than not. Or even if you have a friend who's living like this, she'll follow the same pattern and not be able to support you in the way that you need. If one woman is in a state of helplessness and believes that nothing is going to change and this is what life is like for women after marriage, then she's very likely only going to be able to offer this type of advice to other women in similar situations. When no one else is in your corner, you might find it harder to stand your ground and to advocate for yourself. This is where the husband's role is vital. If anyone, he needs to be your biggest support. And we know this is hard because it involves going against the grain and challenging a lifetime of conditioning and family narratives. But the risk of not doing this is that your marriage suffers and both of you individually will endure emotional and mental difficulties. I'm sure most of the men are not okay with being married unhappily, but some will actually tolerate it because to them they can blame the wife to avert any responsibility and accountability either from themselves, their parents, or the family. Because when we make someone else the problem, it's a way to avoid the real issue, which is usually a lot bigger. A lot of women get stuck in this state of helplessness because their husband isn't supporting them. The husband checks out from any conversation about his family or his wife's feelings or about moving out, so the wife feels that there's no point in speaking to him anymore. This is a major issue in the marriage. Having one partner suppressing themselves and their emotions is not a healthy way to be in a partnership. There needs to be safety, there needs to be honesty, and there needs to be trust. Without all of these things in your marriage, it's very questionable what your relationship is and where it's going. One of the reasons that the husband might switch off from these kinds of conversations is because he also feels stuck. He feels stuck between his wife and his parents. He might feel stuck financially. He might feel like he's not able to give his wife the thing that she wants. But there are always possibilities. I think as a community, we really need to do better looking at the grey areas. For example, having a conversation to understand one another, rather than assuming that you need to find a solution straight away. Or taking time to explore possibilities instead of thinking in a very black and white way. When you take an interest in dialoguing with curiosity, you can really understand each other on a more deeper level. It's really beneficial for your relationship and potentially for your future as well. One of the reasons that it gets to a point where the conversations are difficult to have, where people shut down and check out, is sometimes because the conversation only comes up when things are really emotionally intense, or when one of the people have reached a sort of breaking point or the marriage is in crisis. Then that makes it a lot more difficult to hold space for the nuances and to create space to really listen to each other, because everybody's emotions will be a lot more heightened, which means people will be more expressive, they might be more quick to react, they might be more defensive. And all of these things shut down the conversation. So I'd also encourage you to practice having conversations about things that are coming up in the marriage between you two from the early stages. When you're able to communicate openly, when you can take your time with the conversation, when you're seeking to support and listen to each other, you will figure something out together. if you can and if you want to. I mean, if living with in-laws is not something that you want long term, you can ask yourself, what can I do whilst I'm here? And that might involve looking at how you're coping or ways to regain your autonomy and having the bigger conversations. But you might also decide that actually this isn't what you want. And if there isn't any effort in bridging the gaps, then you'll need to see if you can live like this or not. In some cases, you might need to think about ending things. When it comes to overcoming this helplessness, there's a very important part that's located within you as an individual. And I know this can be even hard to hear when you're feeling like this. It's like there's a candle flame outside in the drizzling rain, and I'm asking that flame to keep burning. But that's not the complete picture. I want that flame within you to stay alive. A candle has a wick within it that can continue to burn for a really long time. But if it's up against external forces like the rain and the wind, it is more likely to be put out. I really like this analogy because it also shows that the rain and the wind need to stop, or that the candle needs to be put in a better environment for it to have a chance of staying alive. So these are the relational and environmental aspects that impact you. And you can try and move yourself to a more secluded and sheltered part of the yard or move inside somewhere. And it is going to involve effort. You might need to ask for someone's support to lift you up or to open a door, and that's completely okay. You don't have to do anything by yourself. I think it's really unfair to only focus on an individual's agency when it's so depleted. You also have to think about social networks, family relationships, places of support, even if it's just one person. It's like having someone who's fanning the small flame on the candle. Now, if you are this candle out in the elements and you're fighting to stay alive, asking yourself, is this how it's going to be for the rest of my life? It doesn't have to be. But it does require you to make some different decisions because the rain might never stop. You might have stayed in the situation for too long already and you don't see a way out. But if you're searching, the way is always going to show up. It might be difficult, it might come at a cost, it might take time, it might involve some risk. But if you're searching, then the door will always present itself. And it's your choice whether you walk towards it and whether you walk through it. I do want to elaborate on the choice part of that because when you're in a state of helplessness, it's not as easy and straightforward as just making that choice because your nervous system is in a freeze state. When a person has repeatedly encountered and endured negative experiences that have felt beyond their control and they're in this state of learned helplessness, they stop trying to change the circumstances even if there is scope to do that. They become passive, they disengage, they feel more apathy. It's like they don't see the point in even trying and they haven't got any willpower. Think about whether you have any of these feelings and thoughts, like there's no point in trying or nothing I do matters. When a person is in this state of helplessness, they will lack motivation towards change and even setting themselves anything to achieve. Learned helplessness can also be a response to trauma, abuse, and neglect. Imagine a child who sees his parents constantly fighting and can't do anything about it, or a daughter-in-law who's being emotionally abused. So there's potentially a lot happening in this state of helplessness, and doing something different needs to come with compassion and kindness as well. So when I say about walking towards the door that presents itself or acting on your choice, I also know how hard this will feel. But just because it's hard, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. One of the key things here is to start off small. Start from where you are right now. Don't think 10 steps ahead or 6 months ahead. Just start from the very moment that you're in. Otherwise, you risk setting yourself up for further feelings of failure and disappointment. When I'm working with daughters-in-law who are in a state of helplessness about their situation, there's little use in focusing on the living situation at that point because it feels out of her control and she likely doesn't have the energy or support or the resources to do anything different. There's a real possibility for the therapist to get caught in the stuckness here. It's happened to me before. But because learned helplessness comes with hopelessness and often low mood, it's important to work on those things first so you can build your energy and strength back up. And that's why I find more helpful, if there's no immediate risk or crisis, to start gently beginning a process of mobilization. It's like practicing picking up pebbles before pushing a boulder. So we'll work on supporting her to create movement in her life on an individual level. This might look like starting to give yourself a bit more time to be engaged in something that energizes you. or making changes in your internal dialogue from closed and passive language to more open and active language. For example, if you've cooked something and your in-laws don't like it, instead of adopting the negative thought that says, "Oh, I can never do anything right," you might say something more realistic and kinder, like, "I like how I cooked this even if my in-laws didn't." Or telling yourself that I'm proud of myself for trying something that was challenging, and next time I'll make some changes. I would encourage you to practice creating and saying these sorts of sentences out loud to yourself and feel the difference that they have. It could also look like making a suggestion rather than following others in your decisions, like making a plan to go out, and it could just be for an hour to go somewhere. And even if no one else wants to, then you can go by yourself and do something with the family later in the day. Or choosing to buy something for yourself when you're out doing the groceries, rather than just thinking about your husband or his parents or the kids, thinking about what you want as well. Because what you want and what you like matters just as much as what everyone else wants and what everyone else likes. The more you begin to mobilize, the more movement you'll experience, and you'll start to come out of that tight space. You'll start to regain a sense of control and agency. You'll start to see that, oh, wait a second, I made that decision and really enjoyed it. And I did that thing that I thought I would never get done. Or I'm glad that I listened to myself. And the feelings start to shift. Now you begin to experience other emotions like relief, satisfaction, strength, self-trust, resilience, and even hope. You start to feel more optimistic. The researcher and psychologist Martin Seligman, who coined the term learned helplessness back in the 70s, also went on to create the concept of learned optimism. As you do things differently and talk to yourself in a more helpful way, you'll create a very important internal change. The great thing about this journey is that it has the potential to shape how you respond to difficulties in the future too. When you begin to overcome this helplessness state and regain your power and agency, you can carry these new qualities and beliefs with you. So other problems that come up in life might be met with a different response that is more open and creative, more confident and encouraging, rather than being met with a sense of despair and defeat. I imagine that's also going to influence people around you because you'll be showing up differently in your relationships. Having said that, you can also benefit from being around people who can be optimistic, people who show you and tell you that things can be different. When it comes to your nervous system, there's a lot that you can work with to come out of a freeze state. Emotions that get stuck in your body can be dislodged and released through things like physical movement. It could be a burst of exercise, taking up dance or martial arts, even skipping or having a run around with the kids. You can do it more therapeutically as well through things like breath work and somatic therapy. If there's trauma present, then always work with somebody who's qualified. One of the last things that I want to mention is around faith. If you're a woman with a faith, then take some pressure off yourself and bring God into the equation. Sometimes Western therapy focuses too much on the individual's needs and desires, and this creates an imbalance in your sense of control. You might start pressuring yourself to change the situation beyond what you're able to, and blaming yourself when the things that you're trying aren't leading anywhere that you want. Ultimately, it is God who opens the doors to change. And remembering this can help you to be kinder to yourself and to develop a greater trust in Him, because His wisdom is far greater than anything that we know. For example, if you've had house viewings but things don't seem to be moving along, then there's wisdom in that. Even in the delay of getting what you want, there are gifts. God might be showing you that this isn't the right time for you, or to do something different. And although the ultimate change comes from God's will, it does require your will to put things into motion. So for example, maybe you take the leap and have a difficult conversation with your partner and it leads to something constructive. If you hadn't taken the leap and had that conversation, then nothing would have happened. There's so much wisdom in our situations and the way that we seek to move through them. If you become more skilled at listening to that wisdom, then you'll feel held by God no matter how difficult the situation or how emotional you're feeling. Because our decisions are not just based on our desires, and change isn't just based on our effort, but on the dynamic interaction between ourselves and something that is greater and wiser than we are. If the inspiration and guidance that you're receiving are from God, then that can give you strength to trust yourself in taking the next step. There's nothing more reassuring than knowing that you're in the hands and care of the one who created you. If you've benefited from today's episode, do like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you've been affected by anything discussed in today's episode and you'd like to work together, you can join my daughter-in-law's membership group, or book in for one-to-one or couples therapy with myself or another therapist.